Hello everyone, and welcome to my video contribution for Azure Back to School, a great community initiative set up by Wim Matthyssen to share knowledge and help people learn new things and improve their skill set. In this video, I will tell you all about Azure Backup and how it can be used to backup and restore all your Azure IaaS workloads. Let me first share a little bit about myself. My name is Wim Matthyssen. I live in Belgium where I work as a cloud architect. Next to that, I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, so I also deliver all kinds of Azure trainings. Community-wise, I'm a founding board member of a Belgian user group called MC2MC. I also have my own blog, https://wimmatthyssen.com, where I blog a lot about my daily experience with Azure and all related Microsoft hybrid cloud services. Since July of this year, I'm also awarded as a Microsoft Azure MVP, what a great honor was and still is. And like most IT professionals these days, I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you ever want to reach out or just want to say hi or ask a question about Azure Backup, you can always contact me through my Twitter handle @Wim or through LinkedIn. In this video, first of all, I will explain which advantages Azure Backup can give us when you use it to back up your hybrid cloud resources, and this during a short introduction. After that, I will give you a walkthrough on how you can back up your different IaaS workloads, followed by a demo. And then I will take a deeper look into the pricing. So sit back and let us get started. The first question we can ask ourselves is why we should use Azure Backup to back up our Azure resources. A thing that most companies have in common these days is data that drives the company's business. And this data, in all its forms, has become the currency of our modern economy. Improving backup and recovery for that data should be one of the priorities for every IT or cloud administrator. Just like the IT admin was used to protect their on-premise resources, they should also protect their Azure resources. And what's better way to doing this directly from a built-in Azure service like Azure Backup? Because Azure Backup is a built-in backup solution, it not only requires zero infrastructure and hereby reduces complexity, you can set it up with just a couple of clicks, but it also has no upfront cost and you only pay for what you use. Next to that, it has an enterprise-grade SLA of 99.9% and foresees long-term retention up to 99 years. I still don't really know who could ever back up his data for 99 years, but if you want, you can. And last but not least, you can use a central management blade to manage and protect all your workloads. If they're running on premises with the use of the Marsh agent or Azure Backup Server, or if they're running in the Azure cloud, you can do it all. So to capture Azure Backup in just one sentence, you can say Azure Backup is your reliable, secure, and cost-competitive hybrid cloud backup solution. Let us now look on how you can back up your Azure IaaS workloads. There are different scenarios where you could use Azure IaaS VM backup. First of all, in case of data loss or corruption, where you can use Azure Backup to do an instant file restore. The second one is the accidental deletion of an Azure VM. Hopefully that doesn't happen a lot with your production VMs, but it could happen. And if that's the case, you could use Azure Backup to do a complete VM restore. And the third one, and also an interesting one, you probably sometimes need to do an update on a VM or update a specific software on a VM, where you're not sure if everything is going to work like it should. Then you could restore that VM to a specific testing subnet, separated from all the production subnets or VNets, install the software and see if it works. If everything is okay, delete that restored VM and do the installation on your production VM. So you can use Azure Backup also as a kind of VM cloning mechanism for POC and testing purposes. Implementing IaaS VM backups is quite simple. You need to create a resource group, and after that, you need to create a recovery services vault in the region where you want to backup your VMs. Keep in mind that you can only backup VMs in the same region as where your vault is located. You should also set a storage replication for your vault before you store any kind of backup data. You can choose between LRS and GRS. And you should do this directly because you can't change it anymore when any data is backed up to your vault. When you have set up your vault, you can then use the default policy or create your own backup policies. In these policies, you define how long a backup should be retained, and this in days, weeks, months, and even years. You also set a number of snapshots, which by default is 2. Also, don't forget to specify the resource groups to store the instant recovery points if you want to use your own naming convention. Otherwise, Microsoft will use its default naming convention and it will not follow your naming convention. And as a final step, you should enable the backup for all the VMs you want, but be aware that to be able to backup any IaaS VM, the VM snapshot extension for Windows VMs and the VM snapshot Linux extension for Linux VMs need to be installed, which isn't the case when you, for example, lifted and shifted an on-premises VM. Then you first need to install it on those VMs. To backup an IaaS Windows VM, the VM agent is installed, and with your first backup, the backup extension is installed. In case of Windows, the VM snapshot extension is installed. Backup then coordinates with the volume shadow copy service, VSS, to take an application consistent snapshot of the VM. By default, backup always takes full VS backups. If Azure Backup can't take an app consistent snapshot, it takes a file consistent snapshot of the underlying storage. When your VM is using managed disks, then the snapshot is first saved on the same Azure storage as your managed disk in the Azure infrastructure, which makes the restore a lot faster than when restoring from the vault. So keep in mind that whenever you need to restore a VM from, for example, the last 7 days, it's faster to do it from a snapshot than from the vault. The process for backing up IaaS Linux VMs is slightly different than backing up Windows VMs. The extension installed on the VM agent is the VM Snapshot Linux extension, and by default only file consistent backups are possible. If you want to foresee application consistent backups, for example, when you run MySQL on a Linux VM, you should customize it by using pre and post scripts, which you can find in the shown GitHub repository. Change those scripts to fit your requirements. Also keep in mind that if you still have some ASM Linux VMs running, that you cannot use Azure Backup to make a backup of them, because backing up Linux VMs is only supported for the ARM model. There are 3 types of snapshots. Application consistent snapshot. When recovering a VM with that kind of snapshot, the VM boots up and there will be no data corruption or loss, because all data in memory and all transaction data is backed up. So the apps all start in a consistent state and you can start working without you needing to do any kind of other action. Then you have the file system consistent backup. When recovering a VM from this state, there is also no data corruption or loss, but there is no guarantee that your application is able to start up, and probably should take manual actions to get your application or applications running again. And finally, you have the crash consistent snapshot. This one takes a snapshot of all the files at exact the same time. This means that any files that rely on each other are at the same point, backed up in the same point in time, and thus consistent. Most of the time, crash consistent backups are fine for most non-database applications, but they don't really work for databases because they don't capture all the data in memory or any pending I/O operations. When you restore a VM from this kind of backup, normally the VM would start up, but there is no guarantee. And when it starts, it will first perform a disk check to fix any corruption errors. You also have some different restore options. You have the option to create a new VM. You can specify the name, resource group, and even the virtual network and a storage account. Another option is to restore a disk. With this option, you can restore a specific disk, which you can use to replace the current disk. Know that this option is only available for managed disks. Another thing you can do with a restored disk is attach it to another VM. When you restore an OS disk, it also creates a JSON template, which allows you to rebuild the VM based on the disk. This option is useful if you want to customize the VM or if you want to add some specific configuration settings, which were not available at the time of the VM creation. Finally, you can also recover files from an Azure Virtual Machine backup. This option is only available for ARM VMs. When you use it, Azure Backup creates an executable or script which you need to run at your local computer. This script will mount a volume, and then you can access the files through Windows Explorer. You can then copy the files to your local computer or copy them to any other desired location. These days, you can also restore an encrypted VM, and you can also do a cross-region restore. Nowadays, you can also back up SQL Server databases running within an Azure VM, where you could log into the Azure portal, select your SQL servers and databases you want to backup, and specify a backup policy. It gives you log backups up to 15 minutes with point-in-time restore using native SQL APIs, and you can enable auto-protect to directly protect all your new databases whenever they are created. There are some things you should keep in mind when working with Azure Backup for Azure IaaS VMs. You can create up to 500 recovery services vaults per subscription, and you can register 1,000 VMs per vault. You can only change the storage options before you have any data backed up. Azure VMs have one scheduled backup each day, and you can make 4 on-demand backups each day. For backing up VMs with Azure Disk Encryption, you need to provide permissions for Azure Backup to access the key vault. And you should not put a resource lock on the by Azure Backup generated resource group where your snapshots are stored, or even on the resource group where your vault is created. You should use a network security group service tag for Azure Backup to whitelist all Azure IP addresses needed to be able to, for example, backup SQL in an Azure VM. Otherwise, when you're using NSGs, backups will fail. And now it's time for our first demo. So let me close the slide deck and open the Azure portal. So, like you can see, I'm already logged into the Azure portal. The first thing I want to show you in this demo is how you can create a recovery services vault. You can go to recovery services vault from the sidebar, or you can just type it in the global search bar. So just type in recovery services vault. The nice thing is when you look at and want to open it from over here, you also get the links to the Microsoft documentation. So you can click on those links, another tab will open, and you can directly read the complete Microsoft doc. We go back to the Azure portal. I will open the recovery service vault from the sidebar now. You can see I already created 3 other recovery service vaults, but to create a new one, just click on Add. It will open, select your subscription, select the resource group. I will select my backup resource group, enter a name for the vault. I will call it the 04. The region is also an important thing you should keep in mind because depending in which region your VMs are deployed, the recovery services vault, if you want to backup VMs, should be located in the same region. Because all my VMs are in the West Europe region, I will leave it to West Europe. Then click on tags. Here you can specify all the tags you want to use. I'm just going to use the environment one and just select the value demo. Then click on review and create. If there are any faults, it will mention it and then you can go back and change them. For now, everything is okay. Just click on create and then the deployment will start. Normally, it will just take a minute. So let us just wait for it. It will not take that long. Already here. So you can now go to the resource. The first thing what you need to do whenever you create a new recovery services vault is change the storage redundancy option. You can do this by going to properties. Under backup configuration, click on update, and you can see geo-redundant, and you can select geo-redundant or locally redundant. The default is geo-redundant, so if you use Azure Backup as your primary backup source, just keep it to the default. If you're using it for test purposes, you can change it to locally redundant. Because mine is a demo environment, I will set it to locally redundant. To save your settings, just click on Save. And then this will be applied. And then you can close it. Another nice extra feature added these days is the security settings. If you click on Update, you can see soft delete. For example, soft delete for Azure Virtual Machines is enabled. This allows you when someone by accident deletes a backup from a VM or a malicious user deletes a backup, that it will be retained for another 14 days. And in that specific time period, you're still able to restore the data from that specific backup. So it's a nice add-on. If you ever wanted to delete a recovery services fault, because this setting is on by default, the recovery services fault needs to be completely empty. You should also clean up those soft deleted backups. So you first delete everything, then it's going to go in a soft delete state. Then you go to that specific VM in the data, click on undelete and delete it, and then it's completely gone. There are a lot of scripts available to do this in a handy way and in a quick way. So look them up, you will probably find them. So you can also set alerts for your Vault. Just go to the monitoring, click on backup alerts, click on configure notifications. You can see email notifications at the moment are off. Just click on, type in an email address you want to specify. Let me take this one. You can select per alert or in a hourly digit, and you can choose between critical warning and information or select all. I just leave it on critical and just click on save. Just keep in mind that you can configure the backup alerts only through the Azure portal. For the moment, there is no Azure PowerShell integration in which you can do it in an automated way. So if you ever want to set this one, you need to do it through the portal. If you can also configure with a log analytics workspace, then you go to diagnostic settings, set it that all the alerts or data is stored in the log analytics workspace, and configure the alerts from over there. Let me go to my other Vault and close this one. So if I go back to my recovery services Vault, I already created some, like I said before. Let me select this one. And if I wanted for the backup policies, let me show this one. It's also important when a backup is created. First of all, there's an instant recovery point you create for every managed disk you're using, and it's stored in the same storage location as your disks. If you don't specify the location for these instant recovery points, Microsoft will create a default one resource group for this, and it will not follow your naming convention. If you want to set it to use your own resource group and your own naming conventions, just click on a policy, click on modify, go down completely to the bottom, and over here, Azure Backup resource group, you can specify the resource group that needs to be used. I already said it, but if you ever want to do it, you can do it for every policy, and you can also do it through scripts. I have a script on my site, if you want to use it, that creates an Azure recovery services Vault and set these specific settings, also the retention policy for your Vault through Azure PowerShell. So you can also use that one or look it up. If you now want to make a backup, that's an important thing. Just go under protected items, click on backup items, click on Azure Virtual Machines. You can see there are some virtual machines. You can click on that. Click on, it's in Azure, it's a virtual machine. Click on backup. Select your policy. In my case, it will take default policy. Just click on add. And all VMs that are not, at the moment, not backed up will be shown. Just click on one of those. Oh, here it is. Click on OK. And just enable backup, and it starts enabling your backup. The first thing, the initial backup will start whenever your policy, the retention period, needs to start a backup. If you want to backup it directly, you need to do it manually or do a script. I will let that one go. If you now want to restore a backup from a specific VM backup, just click on the VM you want to restore. You can see for Windows, this one is a Windows VM. I have application consistent backups. I also have a Linux backup. The difference is that for Linux, if you don't use the pre and post scripts, you're only able to do file system consistent backups. Let me go back to the Windows VM. If I now want to restore that specific VM, just click on Restore VM. Specify your restore point. Let me take this one. Just click on OK. Now you have a few options. You can create a new VM from your backup. You can replace the existing one. Let us do that one. If you replace index, staging location, you need to specify a storage account just to, during the restore, the data needs to be stored somewhere, and that's why it needs a staging location. Afterwards, it's cleaned up. So let me select this one, the DAG one. Just click on restore. It will validate. Over here is a problem because I want to restore a VM. That's also a thing I want to show you. If you want to replace it with a backup, the VM itself needs to be stopped. Otherwise, it will fail because it's a running VM. So let us close this. Just create a new one. You can create a new virtual machine or restore a disk. Enter a name, VM demo. Choose a resource group. Also choose a virtual network. Choose subnet. Also, again, specify a staging location and just click on restore. It will validate it again, and now it should work. So the restore is triggered, and after a period of time, the backup will be stored. So that's it for the demo. So after the demo, let us now take a look at the pricing of Azure Backup. Pricing for Azure Backup is based on a protected instance, which can be any computer, physical or virtual, running on-premises or in the cloud, or any database that is being configured for backup to Azure. An instance is protected once you configure a backup policy and create a backup copy of the data. Pricing for a protected Azure VM varies between 4 and 9 euros. Under 50 gigabytes, you will pay 4 euros. Between 50 gigabytes and 500 gigabytes, you will pay around 8 euros. And for every size above 500 gigabytes, you pay an extra 8 euros. An important factor to keep in mind and oftenly forgotten is that you also need to pay for your storage where your backup data is stored. The price depends if you have chosen for locally redundant storage, LRS, geo-redundant, GRS, or read access geo-redundant, ERA GRS, in case you're using cross-region restores for your blob storage replication. The good thing is that you are not charged for restores, any storage transactions, or for the amount of bandwidth you will use during your backups. The pricing for backing up SQL Server running on an Azure VM is quietly different because you pay for the size of the databases configured for backup or for the size of the database in an availability group. The price is around 27 euros for a database less than 500 gigabytes. And for every instance greater than 500 gigabytes, you pay an extra 27 euros for every extra 500 gigabytes. And of course, also there, don't forget to calculate the storage costs. Of course, there are several ways you can optimize your Azure Backup costs. First of all, you can now use the Azure Backup Pricing Estimator, which is an advanced Azure Backup pricing calculator that can help you to get an idea of the cost savings you can achieve by, for example, switching to a differential backup. Next to that, when you create a new recovery services vault, by default, the GRS replication setting is applied to the vault. While this is the recommended storage replication option for production workloads, you can choose to protect your dev test workloads using LRS. To achieve this in a mixed environment or Azure subscription, you can set up two different vaults, one for production workloads with GRS enabled and the other one for dev test workloads with LRS enabled. You can also optimize your backup policies and retentions with, for example, the use of a shorter retention duration. Another cost optimization tip, if you're backing up resources that do not exist anymore, you can verify if you still need to retain all backups for these resources and otherwise clean them up, because deleting unnecessary backups can also help you save money on your backups costs. And maybe sometimes you also might only require the protection of certain VM data disks and not the entire VM. Luckily now with the selective disk backup feature, you can exclude or include certain data disks for being backed up. And by this you can also lower your backup costs. So that's it. Thank you for your attention. I hope you learned something from this video. Be sure to check out all other videos and blog posts at https://azureBackToSchool.tech, because there will be a lot of other interesting Azure topics covered. You can also keep an eye on Twitter for the hashtags AzureBackToSchool and Azure Family, and don't forget to tweet about it yourself. And if you ever have a question related to Azure Backup or this video, you can always contact me through my Twitter handle @Wim Matthyssen. Bye!